Hi everyone, I'm Ehi and I will be your moderator for today. We're just going to wait a few more minutes just to let everybody through so that we could all be part of this great webinar. So yeah, how has everyone found today? It's been my first day back in the office and I've really enjoyed it, won't lie. It was quite nice seeing other people. Never thought I would say that, but it has been a lot of fun. Not the tube though, never the tube, but yeah.
It's good to get out and actually see colleagues, not just being online. I remember when I first went into the office, it was it's like, oh, I'm not just playing a video game called work. There is other real people that exist out there.
Right, especially if you're meeting people for the first time. Like we just met a colleague who started during this pandemic as well, so that has been really cool to see him in person.
Awesome.
Have you guys been going back into the office at all, or has it been a lot more like we're still waiting to see how it goes?
I went there.
Oh, sorry, go on, Tatiana.
I went there once, and I was really worried that I would like cry in a corporate office, cry of joy at being in this big corporate office back there. And turns out I didn't, so I was quite proud of myself. But I got some books that I'd left in the office. It was very empty. I did see one person that I know, which was nice. And I also noticed that the city center of London seemed really much livelier than I thought it would be. So it was really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I started during COVID just a few months ago, so I was keen to get into the office, and luckily we have that really nice rooftop terrace with sort of like the 360 view of London. So yeah, nice place to have your breakfast coffee or maybe your lunch as well. So yeah, I like going in every week or so. Yeah.
Yeah, rooftop bar seems quite nice. Not rooftop bar, rooftop view would be very, I mean, that would be nice too, but maybe not this time in the morning.
If we had a rooftop bar, I'd be in every day.
Right. Well, I think it would be a great time for us to get started. So without further ado, hello everyone, I'm Ehi, I work at HackerJob and I work in marketing, and I'll be your moderator for today. We have a very exciting webinar coming up, but I just want to introduce HackerJob a little bit beforehand and the Financial Times. So yes, HackerJob is a data-driven and engaging recruitment platform operating in the digital sector. We use key data points to find candidates' jobs uniquely based on their CVs and their skill sets, ensuring that both candidates and companies can conduct a more relevant and targeted approach to recruitment. Beyond that, we also offer support before and after interviews, as well as offering candidates to show off their skills through coding challenges and project uploads, which is a lot of fun, I have been told. So we'll also be talking about the Financial Times, as you'll hear a lot more from the speakers themselves. But just a little brief intro would be that the FT provides a broad range of essential services, including news, comment, data, and analysis to the growing audience of internationally minded business people. Their product and tech team comprises hundreds of developers, designers, product managers, and analysts, and their teams are self-governing and empowered to deliver world-class products for the FT. So before we go any further, because I know you guys are waiting, I already know you guys want to see the speakers, we have a few house rules. For the attendees, I would just like to ask that you please do not use the hands up feature, as we won't necessarily get time to get around to answering everybody's questions via this feature. However, we do have an alternative. If you would put all of your questions into the Q&A function, we will get time to answer some questions in the Q&A part at the end of the webinar, towards the end. And yeah, we can also make sure to look out for a very exciting email from HackerJob, as we'll be sharing a link to the recording of this entire webinar, as well as all of the amazing slides that you're about to see. So I think without further ado, we can hear from our very first speaker, the wonderful Nikita. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. I'm just going to present my screen, which of course is going to be the most difficult part of this talk. Let's just see if that works. Right. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Nikita, and I'm a senior engineer at the Financial Times. Today, I would like to talk about how we track code releases at the FT. As Ehi said, the Financial Times is one of the world's leading business and financial news organizations. As of 2020, we are a fully cloud-hosted company. Mark Barnes, my colleague at the FT, has written an excellent blog on our journey to cloud only. At the FT, we have around 500 microservices being managed by multiple different teams. These teams work in different time zones, releasing code at different times during the day. At any point in time, we want to be able to consistently and confidently answer the question, what changed recently? And if that change causes a disruption, how quickly can we fix it? This is not only important for the teams developing these services, but also important for our operations team, who are watching over our entire technology estate 24/7. How can they associate an alert firing to a recent release? So we set ourselves a challenge. We need to track all code releases happening in our tech estate. Change and release management at the FT was not a new concept. Our legacy change request API, fondly called CRAPI, was tracking releases, both automated and manual, and storing them in a third-party change management tool. There were a few reasons why it wasn't a huge success and why it didn't quite work anymore. Legacy CR API was written in Java around 5 years ago, and the people who wrote it had long moved on. No one in the current team quite understood it anymore. It was not easy to use, and it was very error-prone. Users also needed to specify a start and an end date for the change, thus needing to call the API twice. As a result, teams were often discouraged to add it to their production pipelines since it would constantly break or delay their builds. Let's go through our journey from migrating from this legacy, rarely used CR API to a fully integrated, automated release log process and the lessons we learned along the way. To start off, we did some digging. We spent some time talking to the handful of people who were using this legacy API. We asked them, what about it works and what does not? What can we use and what can we throw away? We summarized all of that feedback and consolidated that into these 4 targets. Since we love us some acronyms, why not? Let's call it SURF. So, how did we address these goals? How did we simplify sending change logs at the FT? Legacy CR API depended on its users for a lot of information. We decided to make the service, now rebranded as Change API, do the work. Instead of requiring 10 different fields from the users, we asked Change API to only provide these three. We asked Change API users to only provide these 3 mandatory values. First off, the service or the system which is being changed or released. We annotate every single service at the FT with a unique ID, which is called a system code. Secondly, we asked users to give us the environment in which the service is being changed. That is it a production or a dev release? And finally, we also want to know the person who is making the change. That is the user here. During our user research, not many users saw the benefit of logging the start and the end date for a release. Rightly so, since with microservices, most of the code releases only really take a few minutes. When designing Change API, we removed the need for the users to tell Change API the start date of the release. So now, instead of having to make 2 separate API calls, they only need to call it once after the change was done. Also, since nobody in the team had a lot of experience with Java, we decided to rewrite it in JavaScript to better support it. Now, how did we solve the problem of avoiding delays on teams' deployment pipelines? We made Change API asynchronous. As long as the user was sending Change API the 3 mandatory fields and it was in a valid format, Change API would almost immediately send an accepted response. An invalid client request would return a bad request instead. Rest of the release log processing happened asynchronously. As far as the user is concerned, the change log request is completed within milliseconds, if that. By doing just these 2 things, we had already solved half of our problems. How did we build trust in the new Change API? Another important lesson we learned was to ensure that the server-side errors do not cause a bad user experience. We decided to simply not throw any of these errors. There wasn't anything a user could do about them anyway. They would just get annoyed at us for breaking their deploy builds. We instead silently log all the errors and let the requests complete successfully. It was up to Change API to handle the retries under the hood. Over time, we made a lot of improvements and modifications to Change API. All of that without changing user interaction with it. This provided our users some much needed assurance that adding Change API to their deploy pipelines will not stop their deployment, even in the case of an error. And finally, how did we highlight the benefit of Change API to our users? Legacy CR API did not get a lot of adoption because our engineering teams did not see any benefit from it. We gave Change API users the ability to get notifications of their releases in real time. All production releases, for example, would by default go to a single Slack channel. A user could also provide a Slack channel of their choosing, and Change API would dutifully send a release notification to it. We went from having to manually inform people that a release is happening to an automated notification model where Change API would send release log automatically on Slack. It looks very bare bones right now, but trust me, it gets much better. In other words, start small. Change and release management is a big topic. If you think about it, external auditors, compliance teams, dev teams, project managers, operations support teams, they're all potential users of change and release management. We picked a handful of engineering teams from different parts of the business using GitHub and Circle CI as our early adopters, since they already had a deployment pipeline in place, and we simply had to hook Change API into it. In its infancy, all Change API did was accept a valid JSON payload which sent a message in Slack upon successful execution. Let's break this down a little. We asked teams using Circle CI to add a single post request to their Circle CI workflow. This request would contain a JSON body and an API key header. This request would then get authenticated by our API gateway platform, which would check the validity of the API key. If the authentication fails, the user gets an authentication error. If the request is successfully authenticated, a Lambda function called validator here would validate this request. If the validation fails, it would send a 400 bad request to the user, ending the user journey there. If, however, the validation is successful, it would immediately send a 202 response to the user, ending the user journey there. Now, asynchronously, the Lambda would then also write to a data stream. We chose AWS Kinesis. Another Lambda function here, called a Slack consumer, would then read this payload and send the message to Slack. I mentioned earlier about giving users a consistent and reliable experience with Change API. I cannot stress the importance of this enough. Reliable behavior of this new Change API was what drove its adoption rate initially. It was fire once and forget. Through all the changes that came later, this part of Change API was never modified. The idea was that we could simply add or remove more features to our steady stream of real-time release logs to continuously, but iteratively improve Change API. Within 3 months of starting this project and a small team of 3 engineers, we produced this Change API MVP. It was a huge success. We expanded our early adopters list and we kicked Change API development into high gear. We integrated Change API with other existing services at the FT. This is what Change API architecture looks like now. Allow me to highlight some interesting areas. We added enrichments. A Lambda function called enricher here would integrate with the GitHub API, for example, to fetch code commit and pull request information. The enricher would also talk to our system registry API and fetch additional information about the service being released. We added many such enrichments over time. It is worth reminding you here that all of this happens asynchronously. The user journey has long ended after sending a valid request payload. Eventually, we also built a Changelog Database. This is Change Viewer, which allows users to search for historical releases logged by Change API. It allows filtering by specific days as well, or system codes. Now, let's remind ourselves what a release notification looked like before in its MVP stage. Now, after all the enrichments, this is what Change API release notification looks like. Thanks to the enrichments, the message contains the full name of the person who made the change, along with the link to the code commit and a troubleshooting guide for the service, just in case the release causes a downtime. We are now even logging changes made to DNS, which until a couple of years ago was a pipe dream. Are there any sysadmins or DevOps engineers here? You probably have seen this haiku before. Would anybody care to guess how many DNS records does the FT have? Think of a number in your head. Last I checked, which was about a month ago, we had upwards of 6,500 DNS records. From my experience, if what's wrong is not obviously evident, it really is always DNS. We also integrated Change API with our monitoring platform. This screenshot illustrates a banner on a services monitoring page if it was released within an hour. Now, we could immediately correlate a service monitoring alerting with its recent release. Here is a graph showing the number of Change API events gradually increasing over time. The dotted line here shows the legacy CR API usage. We decommissioned the legacy system soon after rolling out Change API fully. Dare I say it, we surfed our way to the top. All through the development of Change API, we were using behavioral science to nudge people towards it. Nudges, once you're aware of them, are everywhere. It is a subtle hint that encourages you to make a certain decision without forcing you. Take this Uber Eats email, for example, which I received. It's not asking me that you should go and order something from the app. Rather, it's encouraging or nudging me by trying to remind me that I still have a discount available and I probably should use it. A few such nudges we used to encourage more teams to use Change API at the FT was to start a little bit of a healthy competition. After all, we all love a competition. We told teams, did you know that this other team made 50 code releases in the past week? Would you like to find out how many your team did? We created a dashboard to get people talking about Change API. At the FT, we clock anywhere between 100 or 150 daily releases. A default nudge is the most powerful nudge. As humans, we tend to be inherently averse to making decisions, even if we know that they're good for us. We try to remove all blockers to Change API adoption. We wrote verbose documentation wherever possible with step-by-step instructions on how to integrate Change API with different pipelines. We also wrote a lot of tooling. Since a majority of our teams favor Circle CI, we created a Change API orb, which would allow engineering teams to use YAML instead of bash and curl commands in their config files to integrate with it. This is what an orb config looks like. Orbs, for people who do not know, are an easy way to create reusable YAML configs in Circle CI. We also encourage secondments at the FT. That is, people temporarily take a break from their home teams and work with other teams in the department to either learn a new skill or help other teams upskill on a particular tooling or technology. We use these secondments to integrate Change API into hundreds of repos. There is an excellent talk by my colleague Sarah Wells who talk about nudge theory in greater detail. She also talks about the EAST framework, which can be a really good guide to influence behavior. So, to summarize, hopefully I have managed to convince you that we solve really interesting problems at the FT and in a really fun way. Along with the capability to consistently and confidently be aware of what changed in our microservices state, we were able to answer some really interesting questions like, how has the pandemic affected our code releases? Do our developers prefer a specific time or day to push changes? Even during the first peak of the pandemic back in 2020, we were pushing out code, business as usual. And yes, we definitely do releases on a Friday. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikita. That was amazing. And all of that helpful advice was very, very practical as well. So I'm sure so many of the developers in this webinar will be using that as well. So now we're going to go ahead with the next presentation from Chris. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. I will just quickly share my screen. Oh, I can't do that while Nikita's still sharing. There we go, brilliant.
We can see your screen.
Cool. Ooh. Thank you. Okay, hello, my name is Chris. I work on the cloud enablement team here at the Financial Times. Our team works to govern the FT's cloud infrastructure, making sure it's as secure and cost effective as possible, and also helping out staff with questions about cloud best practices. Today, I'm going to give you a brief overview of my journey, hence the title, from a coding bootcamp graduate to a senior engineer within the FT. Before I begin, I wanted to give you a bit of background about where I came from. I started my career as a secondary chemistry teacher. Whilst I enjoyed teaching itself, the long hours, high pressure environment, and having to dodge scalpels thrown at me by my pupils were things I didn't want to have to do forever. So in 2016, after almost 5 years of teaching, I decided to leave and find a new career entirely. I knew I had a number of transferable skills learned from working as a teacher, and I was optimistic that armed with those, I could find a career that was a much better fit for me. After a short stint of working in HR, specifically in staff training, I stumbled upon the concept of coding bootcamps. I'd done some basic coding as part of a coding club I'd helped out with whilst I was teaching, and I found it quite fun. And in my mind, doing this every day would be really easy, right? In the end, I started at Makers Academy in 2017 and found out it wasn't easy. Makers is a 3-month intense coding bootcamp designed for people moving into tech from other careers. But at this point, even though it wasn't easy, I finally felt like I'd found a career that I could stay in for the long haul. For my final project at Makers, I had begun working on a messaging app with very basic end-to-end encryption. And I found myself wondering how I could take the app that my team had built and put it in the hands of users. And not just in the hands of one user, but potentially many simultaneously. And this led me to researching cloud-based services such as AWS, which up until that point, I'd never even considered. The whole field particularly sparked my interest, and my time between finishing the bootcamp and finding a role, cloud-based services was the thing I started to focus on. A few months later, I was fortunate enough to bag myself a role here at the Financial Times at the start of 2018. And as if it was fate, the role was working in the cloud enablement team as a junior cloud platform engineer, getting to do the stuff day in, day out that I'd been learning for the past few months. So why did I pick the FT? When I was looking for a company after graduating from Makers, it was very important to me that I found an employer that was on the same page with me with regards to a number of things, and the FT actually ticked every single one of those boxes. The first of those things was work-life balance. After working 50 to 60-hour weeks as a teacher, I wanted to work in a much more sustainable manner, and the 35 hours a week that were expected of me at the FT would definitely help to hold off burnout. I also wanted to work on something that sparked my interest, and as I'd already said, the stuff that I was going to get to work on at the FT were exactly the thing that I was interested in. I wanted the opportunity to continue learning too, and about tech that wasn't necessarily directly related to my day-to-day work. Makers had been pretty full on, and there were some things I felt that were left unfinished that I wanted to make sure I'd consolidated before I'd forgotten about them. My new team offered 10% time for us to work on our projects, and that was a big tick for me. As I wasn't from a computer science background, gaining some sort of qualification was also something I was interested in, and completing AWS qualifications was something that was actively encouraged at the FT, especially on the team that I joined. And lastly, I wanted to work somewhere where teamwork was important. One of my favorite things that I'd learned about working in tech was pairing or mob programming, and this was something I was keen to continue. Luckily, the team I now work on does this on a daily basis. So my team, is only obviously only a small part of FT technology. And as I stated at the beginning, we look after the cloud's infrastructure at the FT, which is located in AWS and Heroku. And we make sure the infrastructure built within these services is both secure and cost effective. Not necessarily as cost effective as we would like, but we're getting there. This opportunity gave me a wide scope of potential tools, services, and skills to learn and use, and has led to me working on many different projects since joining the FT. A number of these have been projects where I've had the opportunity to work with other teams from across the FT too. So as I just stated as well, my team pretty much solely works as a mob. We get together to solve our problems as a group, sharing knowledge, cross-pollinating ideas, and solving our problems as a team. This has been a truly incredible growing experience for me and is one of the main things I credit for my growth here at the FT. As we work on almost everything together, this has led me to gain a wide range of knowledge on the tools we use, and means I've also had opportunities to work on many projects that our team's been involved in. It does mean our velocity can be a little slower than other teams, as we always work to make sure everyone in a mob is up to speed before moving forward, but that's great if you're a junior. The mobbing process helped me to get over a fear of driving, which is taking control of the mob and actually hands-on coding. And it enabled me to get over that really quickly. The blameless nature of the FT and the way in which we work, and also working in a mob, was also a very positive environment for me to grow in. Outside of the team's day-to-day work, I've been encouraged to use and even further develop some of the skills I had before joining at the FT. I've had the opportunity to run workshops for internal staff to upskill them in some of the points of friction we have within our cloud services. I've also been encouraged to get involved in several lightning talks, such as this one. I've been involved in organising training for our departments and writing blogs about those training events too. I was interviewed about my experiences with mental health for the FT's This Is Me campaign, which was aiming to break down the stigma associated with mental health at work. And I also had a chance to lead a session teaching others about sketchnoting and how to specifically get started with it. This is a skill that I enjoy using to help wrap my head around more complex technical ideas and processes. All of these opportunities have been great, but the solid engineering progression framework we have here at the FT has enabled me to put all these experiences to good use. The framework sets out a number of clear objectives that individuals should provide evidence for before moving between levels. This allowed me to confidently gauge what level I was currently working at and where I should concentrate my efforts to give me the best opportunities for career progression. If you're interested in seeing the FT's engineering progression framework in more detail, anyone can access it at engineering-progression.ft.com. There you'll be able to see the criteria we have set up for each step in the career ladder and the information we provide to our staff on how best to use the framework too. In summary, I was able to use all these opportunities and all the skills and tools and everything that we have at the FT to enable me to move from a junior engineer with no previous experience in tech and fresh from a coding bootcamp to a senior cloud platform engineer in just under 3 years. Right now, our team is working on solving automated AWS access key rotation, a long-lasting point of friction felt by developers and engineers across the entire company. And alongside all of this, in my 10% time, I also get the chance to work towards the AWS Security Specialist qualification with an aim to eventually completing Solutions Architect at professional level too. So who knows what the future holds for me? I'm pretty excited to find out. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was an amazing insight into your journey. And when you just said that was just under 3 years, that is really, really incredible. So yeah, thank you. Now we are going to hear from Tatiana.
Hello.
And we can see your slide, so everything's good.
Great. Yes, so my name is Tatiana. I'm an engineer at the FT, and I worked for a year on the support team for ft.com, which is basically the team that deals with everything that goes wrong. When something is wrong with the website, that's what we do. And I prepared a talk on the most interesting incident that we had while I was on that team. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about. So ft.com is a website, but it's available on a mobile. Here's what it looks like on a mobile. And its articles are under ft.com. And that's what you'll see if you go to ft.com on a browser. However, if you're coming from Twitter and you click on the link to an ft.com article, you're going to go to the AMP version, which, as you can see, has like slightly different formatting, but also it's using this format called AMP, Accelerated Mobile Page, which is a project from Google and Twitter designed to make really fast mobile pages that are lightweight and that load very fast. So by default, that's the page you'll see if you're coming from Twitter or a Google search for an ft.com article. Now, what happened in terms of the incident when people went to Twitter when the incident started and they opened a link to an FT article, what they saw was this, a big empty page, just headers, no content, not even an error message, just an empty page. And the reason I've picked this incident is because it was really interesting for us because nobody on the team could reproduce it. We weren't able, when we clicked on the article from a Twitter link, it took us to the article and we had no problem. It involved code from a third party. The other reason why it's interesting is because we couldn't get any logs to know how many people were actually affected. We had some people telling us something was wrong, but we didn't have any logs that confirmed how many requests were serving this empty page. And what was quite annoying about it is that those few users that were affected were consistently affected. They could never, ever open an ft.com link from Twitter. So for them, it was quite frustrating. And even though it was not many users, it was really bad for their experience. So we needed to solve it, even though we couldn't reproduce it. Cherry on the cake, one of the few users that was experiencing the problem was one of the board members of the FT. So that's how lucky we were that out of the few users that were affected was somebody, was a board member. C'est la vie. They were very nice about it. And they helped us they provided information about what they were experiencing, which helped us solve it. So what happened day by day? So the first day we get this report in our Slack channel from somebody from editorial who says, hey, this is coming up. Can you please look into it? We start looking into it. We are not experiencing the problem. We do find somebody on another team that is experiencing the problem, and that gives us an error they see in the console about AMP subscription timing out. Error, render timeout waiting for the extension AMP subscriptions to load. That's as much information as we're going to get for a long time. Then in the afternoon, we confirmed that the issue is not device nor browser specific, that it affects AMP links from Twitter or Google search alike. Because we had so few reports, we kind of had doubts as to whether one of these things might be a factor, but turns out no, it was any AMP link. It's not related to a device or a browser. By the end of the day, we do manage to reproduce it artificially locally. So one of our engineers manages to block the loading of that file, CDN, AMP project, etc., via the dev tools, and sees that it results in the same screen being displayed, that empty screen. So that's where we get to by the end of the first day. On the second day, still happening. And now one of the few engineers we had that was able to reproduce the issue is no longer able to do it. And by this, I mean live, not locally, but on like straight from Twitter. And by then we're also getting pretty nervous about not knowing how many people are actually affected. And we're really trying to think through if there's any logs we could add to actually find this out, because as far as we can tell, there's no existing logs that can tell us this. So we speak to somebody who knows AMP well in the team, and they say, no, you can't log failed calls to that file that is failing, because there's no AMP component to do that. And like logging this requires JS, and it has to be between script tags, and anything that has to be between like that requires JS has to use an AMP component, and there's no AMP component for this. So we couldn't add logs to know exactly how many users were affected. Fine, we still continue on and try to solve the problem. We come up by the end of the day with 2 mitigation ideas. One is displaying a sorry page with a link to the ft.com version of the article, so that if they, instead of seeing an empty page, people would at least see this, and then they could click through to the real article. And another thing that we tried to do, that we decided to do, was to default to displaying content when the call to the AMP subscription file fails. Third day, I was able to reproduce it. I was so happy. So we have one person who's able to like consistently reproduce it by the third day, which is great. In the afternoon, we have figured out that because AMP is not able, so yes, what's happening is that our content is only displayed to subscribers, right? You need to have an FT subscription to see our content. And so what AMP is trying to do is to get the subscription status of the user that's trying to get to the page, but they're not able to get that. And that's why they're not displaying any content. And normally there's a fallback so that if they're not able to get the subscription status, they display something. But in this case, even the fallback is failing. Still not sure why. And we also realized that the second mitigation thing we'd planned is not possible because we can't find a way to write code that says if a valid subscription status isn't obtained. So by the end of the third day, that's where we are. Come in the fourth and fifth day. It's the weekend. We didn't work on it. We do sometimes work out of hours. We have volunteers. We have like a persistent team that works out of hours, a support team, and then we have some volunteers as well. We did consider that due to the fact that we think only a handful of users were affected, that it didn't warrant working out of hours. We would only work out of hours for very big impact incidents. So off we go to the sixth day, back in the office. And this is where we realized that not only like the reason it's not working is because the subscription add-on that AMP is using to check the subscription status is not even initialized. So that means that not only does it not work, but also the fallback doesn't work. We also noticed that the timeout is longer than it should be, and that we see multiple timeouts for the same add-on. One of our engineers, who's just figured all of this out, says, so bottom line is like, I kind of know what's happening, but we can't do anything about it because it's happening in the code of the AMP project, which is an open source project, but that Google controls, Google and Twitter. And so basically our plan is to contact Google to tell them and to forge ahead with our mitigation of showing this, sorry, can't see the content not loading, go to this link mitigation. So Matt, our helpful engineer, puts together the test case to explain all his findings exactly. We share this with our Google Developer Relations human. They open an issue about this and describe the problem further. They relabel it as high priority P1, and they link to Matt's example. Then they realize it should be even higher priority. They drop everything. We don't have a level P0, but this is amazing that they do. I love it. And they realize it was all down to a regex. a regex that was too lenient. So what did the regex do exactly? Basically, when AMP is doing is working, it's checking basically which versions of extensions are cached, and it's cached. And then it's comparing that to the latest version of the extensions, including the subscription extensions. And because the regex was too lenient, AMP thought that some users had cached the right version of AMP subscriptions, when in reality, it was AMP subscriptions Google that they had cached. And it just thought, that's close enough, right? Let's not download AMP subscriptions, they'll work fine. It didn't work fine. So there we go. The regex gets fixed by this lovely Google engineer. And on the 8th day, we can, as far as we can tell, because we still don't have logs, it's no longer broken. We have a bunch of people who'd reported the issue who are telling us they no longer have it. So this is great. We even get a thank you from our board member, our favorite affected user, which was lovely. And we also released the content not loading notice. Now, this took us a little bit of time to put together partly because it's AMP, the code we have to write has to be very lightweight, and the components, the pre-baked components that we have that would display this were too heavy. So we had to kind of write ad hoc code for that. And we've decided to keep this on so that if the same issue arises in the future, it'll still be there. If you go to an AMP article now, even if the article displays, we still have this at the bottom because we can't display it conditionally because we can't detect when it's failing. So we're always displaying this at the very bottom of the article. So in this experience, what did we learn? What did we do well? First, no one shouted. Everybody was very civil, even though some users were like consistently unable to access their FT articles from Twitter, and there was more and more noise about it. Everybody was very polite, professional, asking for updates every once in a while, but that was great because that meant we were able to focus on the problem instead of being frazzled. Even though we didn't have any figures on how many users were impacted, the strength of the impact on those few users meant we treated this as a P1 incident, which is our highest level, and it was the right call. We kept communicating, so we have an incident channel where we post regular updates and a daily recap of progress, so anybody who wanted updates could find that in here. We managed to reproduce the issue locally, like kind of, by blocking that file. We didn't understand why the file was blocked, but it did help to confirm that the problem was coming from that file. And then reaching out, like explaining it in a GitHub issue and sending it to Google did make things go a lot faster. It meant Google jumped on it very quickly. Community, they even said that they thanked us for the community support in terms of describing the issue. And yes, as I said, they rectified it really quickly once we told them about it. What we learned / what we could have done better. So there's a motto that is coming from Sarah Wells, who is the tech director for our operations and reliability team, which is mitigate, then fix. As an engineer, we're kind of primed to like solve the actual problem, which is a good general approach, but in terms of incidents when users are affected, the #1 priority should be to try and reduce the impact on the users, and then it's really hard, but like understand the root cause afterwards. And so I think potentially we should have, when we realized the problem was not going to be fixed very quickly, we should have focused more on the content not loading banner. And there were a lot of limitations to AMP, which means we couldn't have logs, we couldn't implement a fallback, like a conditional fallback, and we couldn't easily deploy a mitigation like that banner. So even though it helps with fast loading and referencing, it comes at a price. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, regexes are hard. Like even super senior Google devs make mistakes about that sometimes. And that made me feel a lot better. There we go. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. I feel like we really went on the journey with you there. At some parts I was thinking, oh my gosh, how are they going to solve this? But you really did. So lastly, but definitely not least, we are going to hear from the amazing Melanie.
Hey everyone, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, you can see your screen.
Okay, great. Welcome to my part of the talk on inclusive bot and the importance of the language that we use. My name is Mel and I'm a software engineer in internal products at the Financial Times. Oops, sorry, technical issues. For some reason it's not letting me go to the next slide. Okay, I need to say something really important. Words are hard. They're loaded with meaning. They have the power to harm or to heal people, and they can diminish someone's worth or lift them up. I'm going to talk about how I really woke up to the power words can have. I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm going to tell you about the conversations I had, difficult ones, about the words we use in development as engineers. And I'll tell you what I decided to do about it and what I've tried to keep doing to keep shame out of the picture and keep conversations open so we can all take back the power of words. To begin, picture me about 2 years ago, a junior on a new team, eager to learn, wanting to do all the things, deliver value. And we all know you spend a long time trying to get an application running locally when you join a new team, whether you're a junior engineer or just new to the business. It's a hard time, you're not sure of yourself, imposter syndrome definitely kicks in. You come to a README in a GitHub repository and you're reading the instructions. But for the life of you, things don't work. Words jump out, easy, just, simple. You can get comfortable with a certain level of discomfort in being an engineer, in accepting when things don't work first time. And you can go from feeling like you figured it all out to being in a situation where you feel everything's on fire. You can come through that situation and it might have taken you hours or days, but you're just glad things now just work. But those words echo in your head. Was it simple? Was it just not simple for you? Why use those words? Do they add anything? Do they take something away? I think they do. Naming shapes our understanding of how software and hardware work. And like language, it influences our perception of the world. At this point, I remembered a conversation that came up at work sometime before, and it surrounded this particular tweet by Ben Lesh. He said, folks changing names away from things like master and slave and whitelist and blacklist is about making everyone feel welcome. And what matters is inclusion. What doesn't matter are your feelings on what the world is coming to, your slippery slopes, or your well, actually, etymologies. I felt sad we use far more loaded and awful words for things in technology, but I was energized by my colleagues' responses in the discussion around what we could do. I started collecting words, any word that ever hurt anyone on any repo that I could find, and I shared with colleagues the words I had found myself. But I really wanted to open the conversation up and see what they found unhelpful, harmful in their time as a developer working within GitHub, from junior all the way up to senior level. It was time to do something more with that list of words. It was time to do something about their use and their misuse. I began where all that research and experience started, on GitHub. I wanted to find a way to let people know at a relevant point in time, like when they opened a pull request, that they were using language that is unfriendly or unhelpful or not inclusive. I looked into using Probot to automate the workflow I wanted, and I found some really helpful resources online about creating Probots. I took this project on with the help of my mentor, Rowan Manning, who's a principal engineer at the FT. And he paired with me as I rode the bumpy waves of wrangling JavaScript as a then junior engineer. I wrote code to look at the pull requests as they were opened using the GitHub API. And it would check those pull requests for new commits and would find only the lines of code that were added. There was a lot of testing. Once I got the initial app running locally, where I installed the bot on my own private repo, I made a lot of sample pull requests. Each one of these branches is representative of pull requests that I made to test the bot, and this number only shows the ones that I haven't had time to delete yet. I started by looking for a random word in any recently opened pull requests. I chose a random word, bananas, and searched through the pull request for it. And you can see here by test 13, there are no bananas. Then there was a lot more testing, and you can see at what level of frustration or success I was at by the names I used for each commit. Pay no attention to the numbers of tests. This was going really well. But slowly I got there, and here you can see on a particular repo where code was added, it searches through, it finds the words, and then it posts a message. So finally by test 90, we have a banana. Then it was a case of refining how the message would appear, making sure it was clear and readable, telling people what word was found, and telling them where it was found. I wanted to be clear that I could not tackle everything in one go with just this one bot. So there was a great opportunity in raising the conversation and continuing it amongst teams who use the application. This is where I lent on the README that came with the bot. It listed things like what the bot will do, which is check your pull request for unfriendly or not inclusive terminology, and what it won't do. It won't change your code, it won't correct your grammar, and it won't suggest alternative terms to use yet, though that is something I want to do in future. I wanted to make sure that the language was clear, the purpose was also clear, so that that conversation could be had amongst the team, so they could create their own safe space to discuss and have those conversations amongst themselves. I launched it as a working application that's available on GitHub, and I went about asking different teams at the FT to try it out. I didn't have to wait long, and here's an example of our email platform team testing it out with me, making sure that it works on their repo. I gained some awareness, and I went about making the bot do something small about it, but I couldn't stop there. I needed to keep that conversation going. When I shared the application and I asked other people for the words that they found difficult themselves, I spread the net wider and asked in more general forums and Slack channels. I asked my colleagues for feedback, but things were not immediately rosy. People said things like, out of curiosity, what is the issue with just or obviously? I took a moment before responding. To respond in frustration is to cause painful feelings of embarrassment or distress, and it closes the discussion. The very definition of shame is a painful feeling of embarrassment, feeling ashamed or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. I became aware that shame was not the way to respond to any of the questions that were asked. To read from one response I gave, I've noticed quite a few people have responded with what's wrong with or what is the issue with, when this isn't a case of what is wrong or right. It's about having a conversation about what words might be unfriendly or not inclusive and why that might be. I was in a position of privilege to be able to take on board a lot of questions that were quite full on about words that did not hurt me, but they did hurt my colleagues. And in facing that with an open discussion, we were able to work through things and keep the dialogue open. I really wanted to share this one quote that really stood out to me about the power of shame. Shame corrodes the very part of us that believes we are capable of change. And I couldn't help but throw this one in too. If we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, shame can't exist. Things need to change, and we need to be mindful of the language that we use. We need to get better at understanding each other and our lived experiences. Right now, I just want to talk to you about the amazing work that Self-Defined app are doing with their website. They're taking things a step further, giving us more inclusive and holistic fluid definitions of words to use. Go and check them out. You can donate with your time or financially. They have a lot of amazing work on the roadmap, including an API, and I, for one, am donating myself. To close off, words are hard, but let's be informed. Let's be aware of the problems they cause. Let's talk about it. Let's be transparent about when they're being used, and let's encourage each other to use better, more inclusive ones. To close off, just some links for Self-Defined, ProBot if you'd like to build your own bot, And if you want to give this GitHub bot a go, you can check out this link for Inclusive Bot where it's live. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really, really amazing to see the steps towards being more inclusive. So we have a few minutes left for a Q&A, and a lot of the questions have been coming in quite thick and fast. Some of them have already been answered, so please do check the Q&A function, but we can have some answered live as well. So we're going to hear from Arvin, who will be answering, what does the interview process look like for the FT?
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so my name is Arvin. I'm the technical recruiter. I take care of engineering recruitment in London for the FT. Yeah, so the interview process, generally, you would have an initial call with myself, and then in most cases, we would then book in both your technical interview and your behavioral interview at the same time to be conducted within sort of like a 3-day period. It depends on the position. So like, at the moment we have full stack node positions available in customer products, which is the group responsible for ft.com. We also have Python engineer positions available in Nikita's team. And, for example, for the full stack node role, customer products, there is a short technical test to be completed. It's not timed, anything like that. It would take like an hour, but after that, we would book in both the interviews, as I said. But for example, for the Python role, it's just that initial call with myself, and then straight to interviews. The other question I quickly wanted to sort of answer was there was a question about sort of the general culture of the company. And I think, yeah, it's a really interesting culture. I'm new to company myself, just finished my 3rd month here. And, it's really surprising. You think of the FT as a sort of like an older 130-year-old organization. It is 130 years old. There's no getting around that. But we're definitely very modern in both sort of the technologies we use, but also the general culture of the company as well. I was very pleasantly surprised after joining the company. I mean, Chris mentioned the 10% time that we offer to our engineers across the company here. There's a strict 35-hour work week, which I think is really nice. It's many other companies tell you, it's a 37-hour work week, 40-hour work week, but you often work 50+ hours. But with us, it is generally very strict. And that goes from junior level employees up to principals and directors. They'll stick to that sort of strict 35-hour work week. And the last thing I would mention on that sort of topic is it's very sort of forward thinking in terms of like inclusivity. We've got various employee networks. So there's FT Women, there's Proud FT, there's FT Embrace, which is for our ethnic minority colleagues. And then there's also FT Access for our colleagues with disabilities. And these different employee networks don't just exist as a sort of tokenistic network. They actually work directly with board level in providing feedback and criticism on how we can improve on these various areas. And there's also something called the Next Gen board, which is specifically our junior level colleagues, which again work with board level, specifically more on issues such as like sustainability and whatnot. So I think, these are some nice examples of the culture of the company and how we work. Yeah.
That is amazing. And I think we have maybe one more question that we could ask, which came in towards Tatiana. I just wanted to say that your approach to this challenge was fantastic. How did you keep your team under pressure, calm under pressure?
Thank you. First, I think a lot of it is not due to me, but is due to like the way we do things at the FT. So we have a blameless culture. We really insist on, I think when a new joiner comes in, it's part of, how we tell them the FT is. And even when we run incident reviews, we're just very careful to ensure people are safe to talk about the mistakes they've made, so that we can actually support them and improve the processes that might have gotten in the way. It's also like more productive to ensure that people are not constantly scared of being blamed, because then they can just focus on solving the problem the best they can. So I think generally I'm kind of calmer, like I'm calm as a result of this, and it helps, and just it's like the general atmosphere. Another thing that helps a lot is just being for a year on the team that deals with all the incidents makes you a lot calmer during an incident. I'd really recommend this if you're if that's something that you're experiencing, just exposure, voluntary exposure to that environment is really key. And I had an incident that I dealt with yesterday, and I was a lot calmer than I would have been in my first month. My first month of being on that team was a lot more stressful, just because of getting used to it. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you so much. So that is all we have time for today, but I'd like to say a very big thank you to all of our panelists, to Nikita, to Chris, to Tatiana, to Melanie, and to Arvin. Remember, if you're interested in any of the roles, the link was in the description, and you can also sign up via HackerJob. And we look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.